Hello, good evening again. It's Father Alexander here. Welcome to St. Peter's in Hove. And our next step, our 10th step through the book of Genesis, in part of our walking tour through the Bible. Now, we're in chapter 18, and if you could just have a look at verses 6 onwards. We're going to look at 6 to 15. Now, in the first few verses, Abraham's welcomed in the three complete strangers, and he says to Sarah, don't forget they've got numerous servants. They got he had, if you remember, if we looked back, 218 or 318 retainers. These are the people who looked after his flocks and so on. He was an immensely rich man. 318 sounds like a pretty good number, doesn't it? And you notice it's not a suspiciously round number. It sounds like an accurate number. But then he says to the wife who presides over this entire household, he says, look, go and get flour, make loaves, go and get the best calf from the herd, and milk and cook the calf and so on. Now, you know, and I know that cooking a calf from actually getting a live calf to actually serving it up on a plate is a lengthy business. So they must have taken several hours. In fact, these three strangers lay down under the tree and really took their rest. And it's a day-long picnic, basically, is what they're having. And then they sort of say, where is your wife, Sarah? Well, obviously, we know where she is. She's busy killing the calf and doing all the things with the calf. She's in the tent, he replied. He doesn't say, how do you know she's called Sarah? You haven't seen her. Why are you asking about my wife? Clearly, these three strangers are people of knowledge. They know about Abraham. Abraham realizes they know all about him. Abraham realizes at this point, surely, that he's dealing with the supernatural, people who have an insight that goes beyond the merely human. Then his guest said, I. Now, we've had three guests, aren't there? But now it's just one guest. And it goes between singular and plural quite a lot, which, of course, makes people think that these three are, in fact, one, and these three are prefiguring the Blessed Trinity. Then his guest said, I shall come back to you next year, and then your wife Sarah will have a son. Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent behind him. Now, Abraham and Sarah were old, well on in years, and Sarah had ceased to have her monthly periods. Well, we knew that, didn't we? We knew that they were old and that they couldn't. That's been said before in the previous chapters. So Sarah laughed to herself, thinking, now that I am past the age of childbearing, and my husband is an old man, is pleasure to come my way again? Sarah's laughing at two things. First of all, that she should have a child when she's infertile, when she stopped menstruating. She's also laughing at the fact, and it's plain in the what she says, it's pleasure to come my way again. In other words, her husband has long ceased to make love to her because she's past childbearing. No, she's saying, is the clock going to go back? Are things going to go back to what they were before? Don't be ridiculous. She laughs to herself. Notice she's not laughing at at the man. She's not laughing at her husband. She's laughing at herself. She's sort of saying, there is something, you know exactly what it means, don't you? She's laughing to herself, for goodness sake. We recognize this. And again, this is a bit like that very first thing I started off with in the first step in the walking tours of the Bible, the story of Rebecca and Isaac. This is something we recognize. It's that we see in Sarah what we've seen, what we ourselves have experienced many a time. This weary recognition of the repetitious nature of life. Life has moved on. It's not going to get back. I'm not going to have a child, for goodness sake. I'm not going to have my husband, making love to me, for goodness sake. Well, that's in the past. The past can never be brought back. The sadness and weariness of life, the fact that we have to accept that life passes. That's why she laughs. Bitterish recognition of life has passed her by, and there is no redeeming of time. And yet, as we'll see throughout the Old Testament, time is constantly redeemed. In other words, God gives us back the time we have wasted. God gives us back the opportunities we have lost. Or, for me, one of my favorite phrases from the entire Bible, he will restore to us the years that the locust has eaten. Sarah, no doubt, had a lovely, carefree, beautiful childhood and young womanhood and maturity. Now she's old and that's all past. God is going to give it back to her. It's a miracle, but it'll happen. And then, but Yahweh, the Lord, asked Sarah, why did Sarah laugh and say, am I really going to have a child now I'm old? Nothing is impossible for the Lord. I shall come back to you at the same time next year, and Sarah will have a son. In other words, God, in a nice sort of way, rebukes Sarah, who's just listening round the corner. In a nice sort of way, because God understands that Sarah's lack of faith in this promise from God, she didn't know it was God, but even now he reveals himself as God. Her lack of faith is quite understandable because God's promised her something impossible. Incidentally, this is the first annunciation by God or a spokesman of God of a miraculous birth in the Bible. The last miraculous birth in the Bible is that, of course, of Jesus Christ. And Sarah, in receiving this news, receives it with a sardonic irony, I think we can say, unlike the Blessed Virgin Mary, who receives the news of the birth of Christ with complete faith. And then, of course, she says, Sarah said, I did not laugh, lying because she was afraid. But he replied, oh, yes, you did. God's got a bit of a sense of humour. Oh, yes, you did. God rather likes Sarah. Doesn't sort of strike her dumb or sort of do something terrible to her. He said, oh, yes, you did. He said, oh, I know you. Yeah, I know what you're like. Yes, you did. And Sarah, presumably, is therefore rather embarrassed, and the three strangers depart, although we're not told that the three strangers. In fact, the three strangers depart at the end of the chapter. And then it says, from there the men set out and arrived within sight of Sodom with Abraham accompanying them. So the three men depart and take Abraham with them. And we'll then discover what happens with the three men later. I think this is a theologically rich passage, as I hope I've shown. I also think it is a masterpiece of literature. I think it's one of the greatest short stories ever told. Oh, yes, you did. Bye.